87 missed calls, not texts, not emails. Calls from a man who couldn't interrupt a single vacation but found the nerve to dial the same number 87 times from a beach in the Indian Ocean. I stared at that number from a hospital bed in Memphis, Tennessee. On a gray Tuesday morning in October, every breath felt like a knife between my ribs, and my phone lit up over and over, like a machine built for one purpose, to remind me of exactly who I'd made. I didn't pick up once. Not because I had nothing to say, because I was saving it. My name is Raymond Parker. I'm 68 years old, and what I did that week, quietly, deliberately, without raising my voice once, will tell you everything you need to know about the difference between a man who earns something and a man who simply expects it. Welcome to Revenge Realm. You're going to want to stay until the very end. The crash happened Monday evening, 6:42 p.m. corner of Poplar Avenue and East Parkway, 2 blocks from the dry cleaner I'd used for 11 years. I had the green light. The delivery truck had a driver who was looking somewhere else. 3 fractured ribs, a broken wrist. And what the attending physician, a young woman who looked barely old enough to vote, described as a significantly contused kidney. I asked her to translate that into plain English. She said my kidney was having a very bad week. Welcome to the club. By 7 the next morning I had 2 things in front of me. A hospital breakfast I wasn't going to touch, and a decision I'd been postponing for a decade. I called Gary first. That's the thing nobody warns you about fatherhood. You always reach for the difficult one first, as if some stubborn, irrational part of you is still trying to close a gap that was never going to close. He answered on the second ring. That alone should have told me everything. His voice carried that specific warmth, the kind that only surfaces when he wants something or feels guilty. After 41 years, I'd learned to tell the difference, barely. How bad, he asked once I'd given him the room number. I told him, 3 ribs. Wrist, kidney, there was a pause, not the worried kind, the calculating kind in the background. I could hear his wife, Lucy, her voice low and rapid, coaching him through the conversation like a chess second whispering moves. Those 2 had been married 3 years, and she still treated every exchange like a war room briefing. Then, Gary delivered it. Clean, confident, rehearsed. The Maldives, the resort, the cancellation policy, the deposit they'd lose if they didn't board that Wednesday flight. It's not like you're dying, right? The doctor said you're stable. I said it quietly, the same voice I'd used when he was 12 years old, lying to my face about his report card. Go on your trip. He exhaled. Relief dressed up as reluctance. You work too hard, Dad. Get some rest. He hung up before I could respond to that particular masterpiece of irony. There I was, 68 years old, lying in a hospital bed with a fractured wrist and a bruised kidney, being told by the man I had been writing a $6,000 check to every single month for 9 years straight that I worked too hard. I placed the phone face down on the bedside table. I stared at the ceiling, and I made 2 phone calls that would quietly rearrange everything. The first call went to my accountant, Ben, a precise, unflappable man in East Memphis who had managed my finances for 19 years and had never once asked a question he didn't already know the answer to. Suspend the monthly transfer to Gary's account, I told him, effective immediately, indefinitely. Ben said one word, amount, 6,000. Done, 9 years, $54,000 per year, nearly $500,000, total, wire transferred into a life Gary had built entirely on the assumption that I would keep paying for it. Host note, here's a fact most people don't consider. Financial psychologists call this pattern learned financial helplessness when consistent monetary support from a parent gradually erodes an adult child's internal drive to build independence. Raymond had been unknowingly funding Gary's emotional disengagement for nearly a decade. The second call went to Prestige Home Nursing on Union Avenue. I arranged for a live-in care professional, a woman named Denise, 17 years of experience, a voice on the phone that made everything feel like it was going to be handled correctly. In that moment, that was worth more than anything money could buy at a Maldives resort. Turner walked through the door at 4:23 that afternoon. No announcement, no dramatic entrance. Just Turner, 36 years old, still in his work jacket from the freight yard out in Bartlett, a crease on his cheek from the hard hat he'd worn since 6 that morning. He took one look at the room, the wrist brace, the IV stand, the untouched Jell-O cup Brenda had left with genuine optimism. He pulled a chair from the corner, sat down, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. What do you need? 4 words. I've sat through eulogies that moved me less, host note. Here's what makes Turner's arrival even more remarkable. He hadn't been notified by anyone in the immediate family. A 74-year-old neighbor, Mrs. Pettigrew, had spotted the ambulance Monday night and tracked down the freight yard. Turner had taken a half day the moment he found out. He didn't ask if it was convenient, he simply came. Turner was not my biological son. He was the child of my younger sister, Maggie, gone at 31, an aneurysm that announced itself with no warning and no grace period. She'd left behind a 9-year-old boy, no father in the picture, no family except me. Turner had nobody, so Turner had me. I'd never told Gary I was leaving Turner anything in my will. I told myself it was to keep the peace, to avoid favoritism, to make holidays manageable. Lying in room 214, watching Turner walk to the hospital cafeteria to find me something without mushrooms because he'd remembered that for 22 years, I stopped believing my own excuse. Thursday morning, Arthur Simmons on Peabody Place. 22 years, $400 an hour, not a single wasted word between us. The 17-year-old Will was already laid flat on his conference table when we arrived. Turner drove me in his '09 Camry, cracked side mirror, steady hands on the wheel, eyes forward. We didn't talk. We didn't need to. Host note, research on family business succession reveals a sobering truth. Fewer than 30% of family-owned companies successfully transfer to the second generation. By the third generation, that number drops to just 12%. Raymond Parker was not going to become a statistic. 2 hours, 17 pages. Blue Ink Parker Logistics, 31 years of before dawn mornings. Brutal negotiations. One lease truck turned into a $14 million regional freight company, went to Turner. 70% controlling interest, effective upon my death or voluntary transfer. Raymond Parker was not going to become a statistic. 2 hours, 17 pages. Blue Ink. Parker Logistics, 31 years of before dawn mornings. Brutal negotiations. One lease truck turned into a $14 million regional freight company, went to Turner. 70% controlling interest, effective upon my death or voluntary transfer. The remaining 30% went to a children's literacy foundation on the south side of Memphis. Maggie had volunteered there before she died. She used to bring young Turner on Saturday afternoons. He'd sit in the corner reading quietly while she helped struggling kids with their homework. It felt right. It felt exactly like her. Gary received the lake house in Tunica. 3 bedrooms, good dock. $400,000 in assessed value, a fair settlement for a son who had done just enough to qualify as one. And then there was the letter, 1 page. My words, not Arthur's, written Tuesday night in room 214, left hand, because my right was braced, while the ventilation unit rattled and Memphis slept outside my window. Every sentence cost me something real. I wasn't cruel in that letter. Cruelty would have been the easy road, and I have never been interested in easy. I told Gary what 9 years of $6,000 monthly transfers had actually been. Not generosity, not love, guilt. The guilt of a father who watched himself raise a transactional son and spent a decade writing checks instead of having the single honest conversation that might have changed the trajectory of both their lives. I told him the checks were finished. I told him I loved him completely, without conditions, the way you love someone you created from nothing, even when they hollow you out in ways that take your breath away. And then I told him the truth he needed most. Love and financing are 2 entirely different obligations, and going forward I was only responsible for one of them. Arthur sealed the envelope himself. Marked it, Gary, personal courier delivery, Friday morning. I gave him one more night of sleep before everything changed. Gary was standing outside room 214 when Turner and I stepped off the elevator Thursday afternoon. Maldives tan, expensive carry-on, travel-worn linen shirt. The expression of a man who had cut a $10,000 vacation short and was still working out how to be furious without revealing how frightened he was. Lucy hadn't come up. Smart woman. She'd read the situation from the parking garage. He looked at me, looked at Turner, looked back. You changed the transfer, he said. Yes, you're changing the will, not a question. Details travel fast in Memphis. They always have. I looked at my son, 41 years old, jaw set exactly the way mine sets when something has already slipped beyond my reach. He looked exactly like me. He had always looked exactly like me. Once that filled me with pride. Standing in that corridor, it just made me profoundly bone-deep tired. Gary, I kept my voice flat. quiet, immovable. The negotiation voice, the voice that had closed $20 million in freight contracts across 3 decades. You flew home from the Maldives. That tells me you already know something has changed. What you don't know yet is how permanent. Then tell me right now. Arthur Simmons will walk you through everything Friday morning. There's a letter waiting with him. Read it before you call me. Before you call anyone, read the letter first. I paused, and then I gave him the only thing I had left to give that cost me nothing, and meant everything. I love you, every day of your life. That is not changing, one beat. What's changing is that I am done paying for the privilege of your attention. The words landed. I watched them land. Something moved across his face fast, like weather passing, anger on the surface, and underneath it, something rarer, something shaped like shame, something that might grow into self-awareness someday if he gave it the room. Turner held the door open. I walked through. The door swung shut. After a while, the corridor went quiet, and it stayed that way. Some men burn everything down when they're finished with it, not me. I hand the keys to the right person. I let the wrong one find out from a courier on a Friday morning, and I sleep the sleep of a man who finally settled a debt he carried for 30 years. 68 years old, 3 broken ribs, 1 bruised kidney. And the most important paperwork of my life, signed, sealed, and delivered in blue ink on a Thursday afternoon in Memphis, Tennessee. Turner Parker will run a $14 million company, because that is what happens when a man spends 36 years earning something without ever once presenting you with an invoice. It finds him. And Gary. Gary has a lake house, a letter, and a choice. What he does with that choice, that part isn't mine to carry anymore. If this story hit you somewhere real, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment below. There are more stories coming. Stories about loyalty, betrayal, and the quiet decisions that rewrite everything. You're going to want to be here for every single one.